Hello, everybody, and welcome to Game Chat, where your favorite gamers' hosts discuss some of their favorite shared experiences in the medium. I'm Alexander Kazina, Gamer's main writer, and I'm joined as usual by Gamer's founder and editor, Ailert.
Hi guys, welcome back.
And today we are going to be discussing Dead Space. Now, when I laid out this discussion, my initial plan was that we would just be discussing the first game, but I laid it out in such a way that if the conversation shifts towards Dead Space 2, Dead Space 3, the franchise as a whole, I'm not going to prevent it. I'm not going to kind of pull against the weave of destiny, so to speak.
Good.
So
Awesome.
I want to start off by asking, Dead Space the Dead Space series developed primarily by Visceral Games. And it's really the series that got Visceral Games on the map. But did you happen to have any prior experience with Visceral Games' prior titles?
To be honest, I've heard a lot of good things about their Lord of the Rings games, and The Godfather seems to be a really a good movie to game translation, but I've never played it. So, to be honest, no, Dead Space was really my first introduction with the studio, or EA Redwood Shores, as they were called back in the day.
Yeah. To give people some context, when they were known as EA Redwood Shores back in the day, some of the games that they worked on, in addition to Godfather and Godfather 2, were the Tiger Woods PGA games, some Lord of the Ring games, including Lord of the Rings Return of the King. They worked on a few racing games. Their first game was Future Cop LAPD, which was a third-person shooter where you get into giant mechanized robot suits to fight in a crime war in Los Angeles. Looks interesting. I don't think I would ever play it, though.
Yeah, I remember looking at some footage of the game when back when I was making the Dead Space video, and it looked very crude, but interesting in a way. I always like it when these unique things are kind of touched upon, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting studio. Like, on one hand, they were kind of EA's whipping boy, where a lot of what they were doing was licensed stuff, but they also were working on original things here and there. And, while unfortunately they met an untimely end, it is cool that for a brief period of time, they got to own the Dead Space series and kind of largely produce original content.
Yeah, for sure.
So, in my case, I happened to get into Dead Space, I would say, somewhat late. I got into Dead Space 2, not Dead Space 2, the original Dead Space in April of 2014. I got into Dead Space 2 shortly after, so in any case. The situation at the time, it was funny. My parents were in the process of renovating our house. It was a very long process, and this was one of a few games I decided to bring over to a apartment that we were temporarily staying at. And it kept me company during the early days of spring while there wasn't a whole lot to do at that apartment. Did you play it when it first came out, or were you kind of late after the fact?
Very close. I remember playing through middle school, and at first, I got the game very early after its release. But I played the first chapter, and then I decided that this was a bit too scary for me. Which is a shame, because I love the aesthetic, I love the combat, everything about it was very, innovative in a way. But then I don't know, I was too afraid to continue. Then one day a friend came over and we decided to play the game together. We were both still scared, but we eventually put on this CD from a band called Children of Bottom, which is a sort of power metal music band. And they provided us with the means to kind of power through the entire experience, because without it, I mean, we would have been too scared anyways, but that was kind of how we tackled, the campaign.
So I have something to reveal here. I honestly didn't find the original Dead Space all that scary when I played through it.
Really?
And reminiscing on it, it might just be the fact that by the time that I played it, I was, a little bit older than perhaps the recommended demographic for it, although I'm not entirely certain about that. But yeah, playing through it, I am like, this is a very, very atmospheric, very, very entertaining, well-polished action game. And I'm certain if you had a GoPro watching me play through the entirety of the game, you would probably catch a few rare instances where indeed I was spooked, where some small little critter scurried out of a hole and I jumped back in fear. But for the most part, I just was not very scared by it, to be honest.
I mean, my tolerance for scary experiences is a lot lower. In that regard, I mean, fear and all these games, Condemned, they scare me so easily. So I think that's more a personal issue rather than something with the game. But yeah.
Do you also enjoy scary movies as well?
I enjoy them in a very sort of maybe cerebral kind of way, in that I enjoy them when they're very good, movies such as It Follows, that kind of work on the mind more so than having a lot of gore or other similar shock value. I really enjoy it when a horror experience is smart with what they do, and Dead Space was kind of that as well to me.
See, for me personally, I feel like Dead Space kind of coincided directly with the release of films like Saw, for example, in that all of these movies, they're scary, they're tense, but I feel like they're more they're more gory than they are flat out horror focused.
Yeah, and Dead Space kind of provided that change of pace. It did still have the gore, but it was also very creative with what it did with that system.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that was very cool to see.
I realized saying that it's just saying, it was more gory than horror it's kind of selling it short a little bit. Mm-hmm. At least I would say that it's better than some of the later Saw films for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
I am curious, you mentioned how you played the game more or less around when it released. Did you happen to get into any of the cross promotional stuff? For example, Dead Space Downfall, which was an animated film that kind of coincided with its release?
I actually did. I was at the time very much a fan. I became a fan of Dead Space very quickly after the friend and I finished the campaign. And so I started checking up on the movie material, and I saw the anime movie. It was very, I wouldn't say good, but it's always, at the time I was always very excited by these cross promotional things, and I thought it was, cool enough. And countless of nights reading up on the game's wiki page, reading about the necromorphs and all that stuff. That was very interesting to me. And the unitology stuff I also found very interesting. So yeah, I mean, Dead Space kind of struck that chord with me. I don't know if you had a similar kind of experience.
No, I largely learned, I was aware that the animated film existed, but I only really learned about what it was about, and also about the website No Known Survivors, which was also part of the whole alternate reality cross promotion for the film, basically when I was researching the script for the series.
Sure. Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah. Which, by the way, I feel like that kind of stuff is not really done anymore for most video games. I feel like it's incredibly rare that you have cross promotional websites and entire animated films to promote their releases.
Yeah, these days it seems like promotional content is only really relegated to the realms of social media like YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. It's all these kind of augmented reality things and all these gimmicky stuff. It doesn't really happen anymore. I don't know. I feel like it's I always think it's kind of funny when big marketing companies try to be creative, and maybe it's good, maybe it's not, but I kind of miss that flair in games these days. But
so I'm curious about something. Recently on the Prime GVMERS Channel, we released a documentary on the history of the Mirror's Edge series, mm-hmm. which is another series that you have a little bit of experience with, so to speak. Was this did you happen to play Mirror's Edge at around the same time? Because to take people back into the past, the thing about Dead Space and Mirror's Edge is that they both released around the same time. They were kind of a few months apart, and both kind of represented this unexpected burst of creativity from EA Studios, and kind of a attempt on their part to show like, hey, we realize that we've been kind of typified in the past few years as this, big bad third-party developer that just kind of regurgitates franchises. Here are two really high quality, really creative new IPs that we're going to continue to expand on and iterate in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, I did remember also getting Mirror's Edge around the same time, and I did find the first Mirror's Edge really, really exciting as well. I mean, DICE really tried to shake up and show that they were still good for something else other than Battlefield. It just didn't have the same kind of flair or expanded universe excitement that Dead Space gave me. I always think it's really interesting when games show that there exists a world beyond what's shown on screen, and Mirror's Edge did kind of have that, but not to the same extent that Dead Space had. So I believe that's kind of more the reason why I like Dead Space more than Mirror's Edge. But Mirror's Edge is still one of my favorite games nonetheless. So.
As we're talking about both of them, I just realized the original Dead Space and Mirror's Edge both had motion animated components to them. In Dead Space, you had the animated movie that preceded it, and in Mirror's Edge, you had those animated cutscenes as well.
Yeah, interesting. I never really thought about that, but yeah, now that you mention it.
Huh. I mean, I haven't looked this up. I'm pretty sure two entirely separate animation studios did them, and there was no real connection between them. But it is interesting that both of them turned to animation at the time.
Did you happen to know about the second animated Dead Space movie that came out?
I'm pretty certain that I saw the DVD for it at my local video store, because those existed back at the time of Dead Space's release, but I don't think I definitely did not see it.
So the interesting thing about that movie in particular is the fact that, while we're talking about animation, is that film utilized, I think, 3 different forms of animation, or 3 different animators or animation studios. And so you have a part of it was in this kind of anime style. The other part was this faux CGI, cel-shaded kind of thing. And then there was a more Western cartoon style, if I remember correctly. But that movie was really, really bad. So if you ever think about, watching that, I just recommend staying far away from it. It was not good.
Was this Dead Space Aftermath?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Yeah, I distinctly remember that one because the DVD that sounds kind of wonky and awkward, but I very distinctly remember the DVD cover art. It's basically an eyeball that's about to be impaled by the marker from the end of the game.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, that definitely left an impression on me. So, I mean, hey, good on them in that regard.
On that subject, though, I really vividly remember the cover of the first Dead Space. I really thought that was very well done as well, with the floating hand, in space.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's, kind of alluded to something very cool and very ominous. So, yeah, I really like that as well.
Oh, yeah. And on the topic of which, I realize that we've talked a lot about all the things surrounding Dead Space, but we haven't actually really talked about Dead Space that intently itself. But Dead Space is one of the first games that I remember from its time period that had those really gory death animations where your character would just get torn apart and eviscerated. Mm-hmm. I feel like nowadays it's really kind of commonplace to be like, oh, Lara Croft died, she just got impaled. But back in the day, that was like, wow, this is really something.
Yeah, and to the point I kind of raised earlier, I do think that what makes Dead Space stand out in this regard, I remember Call of Duty World at War coming out at, I think, exactly the same year. And Call of Duty World at War also featured, as a first for the series, very graphically intense gore animations and systems and, limbs flying off. But what made Dead Space work with gore is that it functioned. It had a function. You had to cut off the limbs of the enemies in order to incapacitate them. And gain an advantage to them. And I also think that, when it comes to the death animations, it kind of also serves a purpose in that you really don't want to see those death animations, right? I remember the I don't know what this enemy type is called, but it's basically a human skull on little tentacles, And once it gets up to you, it kind of replaces your own head, and you see, Isaac walking away with that head on his body. And I remember that so vividly. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to imagine that there's probably also a breed of gamer out there that's like, yes, show me all the death animations, and there's probably compilation. I mean, well, not probably. There are compilations of YouTube on YouTube of all of the death animations in the game, which have fun watching that. But yeah, obviously, as he said, being able to tear enemies apart limb from limb was a really kind of creative aspect of the original Dead Space and, its sequels as well. I also, though, want to give a huge shout out to the game's UI, which kind of takes a book out of games like Metroid Prime, for example, and basically makes it so that all the game's UI elements are part of the game world. So, for example, your health bar is a bar on the back of Isaac Clarke's suit. Whenever you have to go to a new location, the waypoint, instead of it being like a disembodied arrow or whatever, is like a line that you see along the ground that leads you towards your next destination. Your inventory is like a hologram that basically pops up in front of you and shows you, here's how much health packs you have, here's how much, etc. that you have.
Yeah, for sure. I thought that was really interesting, and that's also kind of the things that disappointed me as the series went on. These elements became more muted, I believe. But yeah, I really like that aspect, the UI stuff. I always thought that was really cool and innovative.
Yeah, I mean, like, to really get into it, I think what's so impressive about the original Dead Space is just how, like, almost every single aspect of the game was, if not really impressively done, innovative in some fashion. I feel like nowadays, like, what most games can kind of hope for is that they're generally polished well around and they have one aspect of them that's unique or that's innovative or that is done in a way that no other game does. And I really do kind of give Visceral Games / Redwood Shores / whatever you want to call it a lot of credit for, like, managing to craft a game that is innovative on so many different fronts.
Yeah, correct. And it seems like, indeed, what you said, it doesn't really happen anymore. Games these days mostly focus around one unique selling point, and that's kind of it. Whereas Dead Space, indeed, also had, like, all of these different elements working together.
Yeah. Like, even something like, for example, the game's sound design, which I think that is a really good job of kind of, like, nailing the claustrophobia and horror of sort of the situation around Isaac.
Oh, for sure. Whenever Isaac got attacked, you could actually hear him, breathe and shout and scream inside of his suit. And that kind of would create an echo, inside of his suit. And that kind of added to this whole claustrophobic feel, which I thought was really well executed on the part of Visceral. So yeah, all these elements were so cool.
You just reminded me, like, even when Isaac is not being attacked, like, just hearing him breathing, especially if he's haggard and he doesn't have a lot of health left, it's like like you can really feel for him and can tell where his head is at, even if you aren't looking at his health bar somehow.
Normally I'm not too much of a fan of protagonists that are silent, but I believe that Dead Space was one of those games that really made it work. But just with Isaac's animations and the sounds that he did make, I believe that was more than enough to kind of sell me on his character, instead of, giving me this frustration of, why aren't you responding to these characters, So, yeah.
Yeah, and it actually, playing a game like Dead Space, it does make you turn back to other famous silent video game protagonists like Gordon Freeman from Half-Life and wonder, like, why aren't you incredibly winded when you run a whole lot or when you're really low on health?
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
I mean, again, to the point of innovations, that's like a admittedly kind of small, but a pretty cool innovation in the aspect of how do we kind of portray this silent protagonist? How do we show what he's feeling without having him actually talk?
Yeah, I agree. I believe that in that way, having animations and small little sounds and everything, just kind of to give the character more personality, can do so much more than having that person talk like really forgettable one-liners and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. One thing I will say, though, we've been speaking very positively about the game so far. One thing that I will say that I was a little bit disappointed by was the game's story. And specifically, my problem with the game's story is I didn't think it was terrible by any stretch of the imagination, but underlying the kind of grisly murder that happens throughout much of it, there is this deeper narrative about this religion called unitology and about how it's basically caused the necromorph outbreak on the Ishimura and is responsible for the predicament that Isaac Clarke is in. And I was annoyed by the fact that basically the lore dump on kind of what unitology is and why Isaac is in this predicament kind of happens all at once, somewhat late into the game. If I recall correctly, there's a codex entry or some sort of like really long lore entry that you pick up, and it basically it reads like a Wikipedia article explaining kind of what's going on. And I remember being kind of disappointed by that because I had played the first two BioShock games actually just prior to playing through Dead Space, and those games I feel are a lot better at sort of spooning out information in incremental steps and kind of building a gradual picture of what's going on slowly but surely.
Okay, so I'm actually going to disagree with you here.
Okay.
What I really thought was well done in Dead Space on the part of the story was the fact that a lot of these things that were presented, story elements, didn't really have to be told for me. They were presented. I believe that I don't know if this was intentional on the part of Visceral or not, but I believe that there was some sort of a theme going on with like the machine being Ishimura and kind of also Isaac being consumed by this bioorganic mass that was the necromorphs and all the veiny stuff that kind of crawled throughout the ship. And as you were progressing through the game, you were kind of trying to claim back this machine from biomass and all that stuff. And then unitology also kind of played a part in that. I don't know if there's a sort of a bigger narrative here, but what I really liked as I progressed through the game was the fact that nothing had to be spelled out for me. There were these themes, there were these levels that kind of, through their design, explain what happened to me. Like the first part, I believe it was level 8 or something, the first moment that you walk into this room and you see all these candles, and with people lying on the floor, kind of insinuating that there is a mass suicide being committed or having been committed. I thought these elements were so strong. Like the level design tells the story and not so much the story itself or the characters, and that's what I really like about Dead Space.
Yeah, I realize that maybe I'm placing too much of an emphasis on like the game's lore as my means of kind of judging its overall storytelling. I do totally agree that, yeah, the levels do a great job of like conveying little miniature stories in of themselves, and I don't want to kind of disparage that or put that down. And I will also say too, like I said, I didn't watch the animated movie that came up before the game came out, sure. And I also didn't participate in No Known Survivors, which was the alternate reality website, so maybe those would have like given a little bit more context to what was going on and would have made me less upset when I discovered this lore dump so late into the game. One other thing I wanted to talk about with regards to the game that I feel is sort of contested in some circles is the game's length. The game is a total of 12 chapters. I don't know why I thought 13. I think I'm thinking of like, I've been playing a lot of Final Fantasy 13 recently, and that there 13 comes up as a number a lot in that game.
I get it.
Yeah, it has 12 chapters, and some people when the game came out kind of felt that it was a little bit too long, that it was sort of a little bit too dragged out. Other people kind of appreciated the fact that, for example, many of the chapters have you going back to previous areas, but from entirely different routes with entirely different objectives, with entirely different enemy layouts. They appreciated that it showed that the Ishimura, despite from the outside seeming like it's this monstrous hulking ship, is not actually that big. Like, where did you kind of come down on that stuff?
Yeah, in terms of backtracking and all that stuff, I feel like Visceral did a good job of keeping all of that relatively interesting. I'm not too sure about the game's length. Maybe it could have been shorter, but then I remember so much that I just kind of enjoyed every moment of the journey and discovering all these aspects. So, no, I wasn't too disappointed. I don't really have strong feelings either way about it. So yeah.
I feel like Dead Space, it kind of coincided directly at the point in time where I feel like video game length was a huge heated topic of discussion online. Like, video game length still to this day is something that people debate and go back and forward on and discuss. Is the price of this game fair with regards to the length it offers? But I feel like the late 2000s especially were a hotbed for those kinds of discussions. And yeah, I wonder if the team felt obliged, like, we really want to kind of give our players an extra bit of value. And I do wonder if they had like taken out a chapter or two, would the game have still been as enjoyable?
I think you would have those 2 chapters removed and received like maybe a mediocre multiplayer component in return. So I don't know if that trade-off would have been worth it in the end. I don't know. I feel like I like the game either way, or too much to have a criticism on this part.
That's a fair point. We're going to be wrapping up soon, but before we do, I decided to do something a little bit different with this episode of Game Chat. As you know, Game Chat is a series that publishes on YouTube to our Gamers Plus channel, where we're not restricted by the kind of prim and properness, button-upness of our main Gamers channel. We can chillax, relax, do things a little bit different here. And so I figured, you know what, let's reach out to our audience and see if they have any memorable memories of the original Dead Space. So I put out a call on the Gamers Reddit and on the Gamers Discord, and Zatanna answered the call. See, you would think that it's spelled just like Zatanna, like the DC Comics character, but their name is spelled Szattanna. So
clever.
Thank you, Zatanna. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. He or she says, after years of playing games where you have to avoid combat where combat isn't possible, I decided to play Dead Space. I sucked so bad at killing the Necromorphs, I literally spent a whole month trying to kill the Leviathan. This game was pure rage for me that it stopped being scary. To this day, I haven't finished it, but as much as I struggled, Dead Space introduced me to combat in games, and now they're my favorite.
Okay.
I have to say there are a lot of plot twists in that comment, but thank you all the same for sending it in. That's really interesting, Zatanna.
Yeah, maybe you would kind of owe it to Dead Space if it played so much a part in your experience as a gamer, to finish it as well, to kind of just show that, you've gained so much experience from playing combat games in the meantime that you can totally beat Dead Space's ass right now.
Tell me if I recall correctly, but the Leviathan was the midpoint boss of the game, correct?
I believe so, yeah, the one with the big circular machine chamber.
Right.
Yeah, I believe that's the one.
I know that back in the day, people had mixed opinions on Dead Space's bosses. I enjoyed the Leviathan, I think in large part because of the context that you were in a zero-gravity environment and you could move around the circular room. I think that significantly made the boss way more interesting than it would have been otherwise. I'm much less partial towards the final boss of the game, though. And for me, what it comes down to is that throughout much of the game, I was a huge fan of the saw-like weapon in the game. I forget what its name is, but it's the one where basically you levitate a small saw blade in front of you and you can use it to kind of like slowly rip enemies apart. The problem is that when you face off against the final boss, oh, by the way, it's called the Ripper.
I see.
Yeah. When you face off against the final boss, you can't use the Ripper as you normally do because the boss's weak points are all like quite a distance away. The only way you can use the Ripper to damage it are by using the Ripper's secondary fire, which is where you basically just fire the saw blade in front of you, which is just not a very effective use of that weapon. So
yeah, I agree on that part. It felt like even though the Leviathan was also like a really big monster, the end boss felt much more Resident Evil to me as opposed to the Leviathan, and it also didn't really. I didn't really like the final fight either. So
yeah. Well, that was a bit of a downer note, but I mean, I think that we're both in agreement that obviously Dead Space 1 is a fantastic game, and that, you know, the Dead Space series has a lot to offer and a lot to talk about. And I think I'd definitely love to go more deeper and deeper into the series in future episodes of this show.
For sure. Yeah, me as well. Definitely.
Yeah. So, if you enjoyed listening to this episode, be sure to subscribe to it on whatever podcast service you listen to it on or on YouTube, and to follow us on Twitter at gamers_. That's GVMERS_. To find out when new installments of all of our shows will be made available. You can also follow yours truly on Twitter at Alex Kazina, and Ailert is at the Ailert.
Yes.
See you next time.